Okay, let's go. Number 1. St. Catherine's Monastery. You arrive before the sun does. The Sinai Peninsula, in the hours before dawn, is cold in ways visitors do not expect. The desert wind comes off the granite ridgeline and moves through you long before you reach the gate. The walls ahead are 87 feet tall, built by order of Emperor Justinian I in 565 AD, and they have not stopped functioning since the day workers set the last stone. This is not a ruin. It is an operating monastery that has run continuously for 1,460 years. The monk who answers the gate will allow you into certain rooms and not into others. Some of those sealed doors were not sealed by invading armies or the collapse of empires. They were sealed by the monks themselves, men who lived here, prayed here, and chose deliberately what would stay hidden. In at least one documented case, their own successors had no record the room existed. In 1859, a German biblical scholar named Constantine von Tischendorf arrived at the monastery and left with something the monks have spent the subsequent 167 years trying to recover. His own published account describes a 4th century Greek manuscript of the Christian Bible, one of the oldest and most complete in existence, stored in a sealed alcove. That manuscript is now held at the British Library in London under the name Codex Sinaiticus. The monastery's position is that Tischendorf took it without authorization. The British Library's position is that it was legitimately acquired. Neither institution has produced documentation sufficient to settle the dispute, and neither position has changed in over a century. The monk's account of how Tischendorf gained access to the alcove diverges from Tischendorf's own published version in ways that have never been reconciled. The Codex Sinaiticus dispute is the most publicly known item in the monastery's file of open questions. It is not the most structurally unusual. In 1975, workers conducting a building project inside the monastery broke through a wall and found a sealed chamber. No one in the monastery's leadership had any record of the room's existence. Inside were 12 previously unknown codices and more than 1,000 parchment folios. The manuscripts dated from the 4th century through the 12th century, 800 years of materials behind a wall that, according to every institutional record the monastery maintains, no living person knew was there. The collection is now referred to as the New Finds. Scholars including Nikolaus Saris of the University of Copenhagen have confirmed that the materials continue to yield previously unknown texts. Not all of them have been fully catalogued. The standard historical explanation for the new finds is that structural change, seismic activity, and the accumulated disorder of 14 centuries of continuous occupation caused the room's existence to be lost from institutional memory. That explanation is coherent as far as it goes. It does not go far enough. A room does not seal itself. Someone made the decision to seal that space, to build over it, and to leave no entry in any record the monastery has preserved. The institution's loss of memory about the room is not an explanation for the sealing. It is the problem. A building project in 1975 found the room by accident. Without that accident, according to every available record, the chamber would still be sealed, and no one would know it was there. A third sealed space at St. Catherine's is neither hidden nor forgotten. The charnel house holds the bones of every monk who has died here across 17 centuries. The skeleton of St. Stephanos, a 6th century gatekeeper who served the monastery during the Byzantine period, sits upright in a wooden chair inside that room, dressed in his monastic habit, positioned to face whoever stands at the entrance. His face is visible from the door. He has held that position for centuries. Monks who die at St. Catherine's today will be added to the charnel house alongside him. The door is sealed to all visitors without exception. The practice of seating Stephanos in his chair, dressed in his habit, turned toward the entrance, has continued for approximately 1,400 years. No written explanation for why it began has been located. The 1975 discovery established something the monastery had not previously had to acknowledge formally. At least one sealed space had existed within the 87-foot walls for roughly 700 years, with no institutional record of it at all. No published archaeological survey has determined whether additional sealed spaces remain. Who were the monks who sealed that chamber, and what did they understand themselves to be doing? If they intended the room to be recovered, why leave no document indicating where it was? If they did not intend it to be recovered, what is the logic of maintaining a living community over it for 7 centuries and then finding it by accident during a construction job? And Stephanos, upright in his chair, dressed in his habit, his face turned toward the door, who has been responsible for positioning him. And why has that practice continued for 1,400 years without anyone writing down why it began? St. Catherine's monks sealed manuscripts for 700 years in a room they then forgot or chose to forget. In Italy, 4 decades after Benedict of Nursia founded the monastery that would define Western monasticism, the monks made a different decision. They sealed their founder's tomb beneath the floor, filed out in organized procession, and did not return for 130 years. Number 2. Monte Cassino Abbey. You are standing on a ridge 1,700 feet above the Liri Valley in Lazio, Italy, and the valley floor below is moving. It is 577 AD. Lombard forces under the Duke Zotto of Benevento are advancing through the terrain you have looked down on for years, and the monks around you are not panicking. They are moving in procession. Someone is carrying a bound manuscript, the text of Benedict's rule, the document that has already begun to reorganize Western Christian monasticism around a single written code. Someone else is carrying the written biography of the man who died in this place roughly 34 years ago. Benedict of Nursia founded this community in 529 AD on the ruins of a Roman fortification built over a pagan altar of Apollo. He died here around 543 AD. His tomb is beneath the floor of the oratory he constructed. You are among the last ones out. The door you pull shut behind you will not be opened again for more than a century. Benedict established Monte Cassino through an act of deliberate erasure. The pagan altar of Apollo that stood on that ridge was not repurposed or repaired. It was destroyed, and the monastery was built on the cleared ground. Pope Gregory the Great documented Benedict's life in the Dialogues, written around 593 to 594 AD, approximately 46 to 50 years after Benedict's death. Gregory records that Benedict built an oratory of St. John the Baptist at the site, and that Benedict was buried there. The Rule of St. Benedict, composed at Monte Cassino during the years Benedict led the community, became the foundational governing document of Western Christian monasticism, copied, distributed, and cited across the next 15 centuries. The standard account of what happened in 577 AD is that the Lombard destruction of Monte Cassino was sudden and violent. The monks fled under immediate threat. The sealed tomb of Benedict, buried beneath a stone floor that would have required tools and time to open, could not be retrieved in a forced departure. Gregory's own dialogues suggest otherwise. Gregory writes that the monks received prophetic warning before the Lombards arrived, not a report from a scout, but advance knowledge sufficient to organize an exit. What they organized was this: they carried the text of the rule, and they carried Benedict's biographical record. Both items required deliberate selection. The tomb was not opened. That is the sequence of decisions recorded in Gregory's dialogues, written within living memory of the events. From approximately 577 AD to 717 AD, Monte Cassino stood empty. That is 140 years, by strict calculation. The period is not historically silent. Carolingian records, papal correspondence, and ecclesiastical chronicles document events across Italy and Europe throughout those decades. Monte Cassino does not appear in them. No monk, no bishop, no pilgrim, no regional administrative record documents entry into the sealed complex during that span. In 717 AD, a Lombard citizen named Petronax traveled from Brescia to the ridge above the Liri Valley, under instruction from Pope Gregory II. The Liber Pontificalis records that Petronax found the site in ruins and began rebuilding the monastic community. The record notes that Petronax found the oratory. What was beneath the oratory floor, the sealed tomb of the monastery's founder, is not described in the Liber Pontificalis, and Petronax left no documented account of its condition. 14 years before Petronax arrived, the historical record introduces a competing claim. The Fleury-Saint-Benoît tradition holds that in 703 AD, a French monk named Aigulf traveled to the abandoned Monte Cassino, entered the sealed oratory, and removed the remains of both Benedict and his sister Scholastica to the Abbey of Fleury in France. Monte Cassino has disputed this claim for 1,300 years. Both communities hold their competing positions today. The dispute cannot be resolved because both sides are working from the same evidentiary absence. No record documents what was beneath that floor when Petronax arrived in 717 AD, and no record documents Agulf entering it in 703 AD. If Agulf's account is accurate, someone entered the sealed oratory during the 140-year abandonment and produced no surviving document. If the account is fabrication or error, whatever Petronax encountered in 717 AD had been sealed beneath that floor since approximately 543 AD. What is irreconcilable is not the competing claim itself, but what both positions require you to believe about the sealed floor. The monks were organized enough, in the face of an advancing army, to carry 2 specific manuscripts to Rome. That organization is documented in the dialogues. Why did that organization not extend to the tomb of the community's founder? Who entered that oratory during the 140 years it stood on the ridge above the Liri Valley, if anyone entered it at all? If Agulf removed the relics in 703 AD, 14 years before Petronax arrived with papal instruction to rebuild, why does the entry into the sealed floor appear in no document from either Italian or French ecclesiastical archives of that period? And when Petronax is recorded as having found the oratory, the Liber Pontificalis does not say what he found beneath it. What was he choosing not to describe? The monks of Monte Cassino sealed their founder beneath stone, walked away in organized procession, and the silence held for 140 years. On a rock pillar, rising 714 feet above the Atlantic off the coast of Ireland, monks built sealed cells with such engineering precision that they have survived 1,400 years. And when those monks eventually left, they left personal items inside the sealed doorways and never came back. Number 3. Skellig Michael. You are 714 feet above the Atlantic Ocean on a jagged pyramidal rock 8 miles off the coast of County Kerry, Ireland. You have been climbing for an hour. The steps beneath your feet were cut from living rock by monks who came before you, 618 of them between the waterline and the settlement at the summit. There is no handrail. On either side of the stairway, the Atlantic drops away into open water. The wind at this height is a physical weight. Below, the boats that brought your supply of dried fish are small against the gray water. The Irish coast is 8 miles to the east. At the summit are 6 stone cells that have been home to a monastic community for as long as anyone here can remember. The monks who built this place chose it because they believed no raider would follow them here. They were wrong about that. But what the raids never explained is where the monks who died here are buried. The monastery attributed to Skellig Michael is dated to the late 6th or early 7th century, its founding traditionally associated with a monk named Fionan, though no contemporary document confirms this directly. The earliest written record appears in the Annals of Ulster for 823 AD, documenting a Norse raid on a place the annals call Selig, in which a monk named Etgar of Selig was captured and drowned. That precision, one person, named in a primary administrative chronicle, tells you the scale of the community being discussed. It was small enough that one death was nationally recorded. A second raid is documented in the Annals of Ulster for 824 AD. The community survived both and continued in scattered documentary references for approximately 3 more centuries. The physical structures those monks built are not approximate. The 6 beehive cells on the summit, known as cloakins, are corbelled dry stone structures built without mortar, each engineered as a sealed unit with a single low stone entrance. Walls narrow by controlled offset as they rise, each stone laid at a slight inward angle so that rainwater runs outward rather than in. These structures have stood on an exposed Atlantic summit for 1,400 years without structural restoration. No mortar. No modern fasteners. 2 boat-shaped oratories, built in the same dry stone technique, stand intact beside them. The engineering is deliberate and sophisticated, designed not to approximate shelter but to guarantee it. The mainstream account for the abandonment, dated to between approximately 1100 and 1150 AD, is coherent and supported by multiple evidence types. North Atlantic climate data recorded in tree ring sequences and ice core samples documents a measurable deterioration in temperature and storm intensity between approximately 1000 and 1200 AD. The Synod of Rathbrisale, in 1111 AD, restructured the Irish Church along continental Benedictine lines, requiring monastic communities to affiliate with accessible mainland foundations. Under this reading, the transfer to Ballinskelligs on the Kerry coast was a rational institutional response to both deteriorating conditions and ecclesiastical mandate. But the archaeological record does not fully support an orderly departure. Early 20th century visitor accounts and conservation documentation produced by the Irish Office of Public Works describe objects found inside the cells: wooden items, leather fragments, cloth remnants consistent with personal belongings rather than liturgical equipment. Communities relocating under institutional pressure pack. They take what belongs to them. What remains at Skellig Michael is not the residue of cleared interiors. The cells were sealed, their doorways closed, with objects left inside. That sequence, belongings remaining, doorways sealed, is not consistent with an organized relocation. It is consistent with either an extremely rapid departure or a deliberate decision to close the interiors before leaving. And then there is the question of the dead. The area designated as a graveyard on Skellig Michael contains grave-shaped mounds. No confirmed skeletal remains have been recovered from any excavation of the site. The community lived here for somewhere between 400 and 600 years. People died here from cold, from illness, from the sustained physical demands of living on a windward Atlantic summit with no passage off the island during storms, a condition that describes most of the winter on Skellig Michael. The summit soil at this elevation and in this composition does not fully decompose bone over that time frame. The absence is not accounted for by natural processes alone. Since Skellig Michael's inscription as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1996, interior access to the cells has been managed and restricted on conservation grounds. No independent academic institution has published a complete catalog of what those interiors contain. 600 years of monks living and dying on this rock. Where are they buried? Why were the cell doorways sealed rather than left open to the same Atlantic weather the community was supposedly fleeing? What was left inside those sealed interiors that no outside institution has enumerated in any published survey? And why does that enumeration remain unavailable? These questions are not answered by the existing documentary record, and the physical evidence, the sealed cells, the absent dead, the restricted interiors, does not resolve them. The monks of Skellig Michael sealed their cells and left everything behind, and the Atlantic has kept it there for 800 years. On a vertical cliff face above the Black Sea in what is now Turkey, another monastic community faced not a choice to leave, but a government order to leave. And before they went, they hid the object the monastery existed to protect inside the rock itself. Number 4. Sumela Monastery. You are standing on a path cut into the cliff face of the Altinder Valley in what is now the Trabzon province of northeastern Turkey. The valley below is more than 2,600 feet down. Above you, built directly into a vertical rock face, is the Monastery of Sumela, a complex of churches, residences, kitchens, and a library stacked against sheer stone at a height that makes the word perched inadequate. The monks who have lived here since 386 AD did not choose this location despite the cliff. They chose it because of the cliff. The founding tradition recorded in 9th century hagiography holds that 2 Athenian monks named Barnabas and Sophronios came to this valley after a vision directed them to a cave in the rock face where an icon of the Virgin Mary, attributed by tradition to the Apostle Luke himself, had already arrived by miraculous means. They did not consecrate the site. They built around what was already there. It is now 1923, and you have in your hand the document that ends 1,537 years of continuous habitation. Before you leave, there is one decision left to make about the icon. The founding tradition of Sumela enters the written record in 9th century accounts that predate any surviving physical evidence from the original 386 AD community. What the tradition maintains is that the icon believed to have been painted by Luke and later transported miraculously from Athens was the reason for the monastery's existence from the beginning. Every physical structure in the complex, from the earliest cave chapel to the late Byzantine churches visible today, was built in service of housing and honoring that object. Byzantine Emperor Alexios III of Trebizond made the journey specifically to venerate it in 1360 AD. The monastery's formal name is the Monastery of the Panagia Sumela, Our Lady of Sumela, and the object at the center of that name was housed in the cave church, carved into the cliff. In 1923, The Convention concerning the exchange of Greek and Turkish populations, signed at Lausanne, required all Greek Orthodox residents of Turkey to relocate to Greece. The monks of Sumela were not raided. They were not expelled under violence. They were given advance notice, time to prepare, and legal obligation to leave permanently. What they left behind, under this reading, reflects a series of deliberate choices made over months of preparation. They took liturgical equipment, manuscripts, and personal effects that can be documented in Greek Orthodox institutional archives from the period. The icon was not among the items documented as removed. Before departing, the monks sealed the icon inside a hidden cavity in the cliff rock within the monastery complex, plastering shut the opening and concealing the location. 8 years later, in 1931, Greek archaeologist Georgios Soteriou led a survey of the abandoned site and located the sealed cavity. Inside, the icon was found wrapped in protective material. It is now held at the Byzantine and Christian Museum in Athens, where it was transferred after conservation work. The Soteriou discovery is documented in Greek archaeological literature. The monk's own written account of the sealing decision, if one exists, has not been made public. The mainstream explanation is the straightforward one. Faced with a forced permanent departure, the monks chose to conceal the monastery's most sacred object rather than risk its seizure or destruction during the transition, expecting either to return themselves or to send someone who could. The Soteriou discovery in 1931 vindicated the choice in practical terms. The icon survived and was recovered. Under this reading, the sealing was protective improvisation under duress, no more mysterious than any other act of wartime or crisis concealment. But the Lausanne Convention was not a sudden crisis. The monks had time to plan and execute the removal of other objects they chose to take. The icon was the reason the monastery existed. If you are leaving a site permanently, which the Lausanne framework made explicit, you do not hide your most important object inside the cliff and hope a Greek archaeologist finds it in 8 years. You take it. The decision to seal the icon inside the rock rather than carry it out of Turkey alongside every other portable sacred object the community removed is not explained by the available documentation. What the monks planned to happen to the icon, and when, and under what circumstances, was not recorded in any document that has been made accessible. What did the monks understand about their own departure? Was it temporary or permanent? And how did that understanding shape the decision to seal the icon inside stone rather than carry it across the border? Were there additional sealed spaces at Sumela that Soteriou's 1931 survey did not locate? And what do 1,537 years of continuous habitation in a restricted cliff monastery leave behind in rock cavities that no external survey has examined? And the icon attributed to Luke Y. If you are a monastic community facing permanent forced removal, would you leave the object your community was founded to protect inside a sealed cavity in a cliff face, rather than ensure its safe passage with you? The monks of Sumela sealed the object that defined their monastery inside the cliff and walked out of the valley. 8 years later, it was found. In Scotland, on an island 9 miles off the coast, a monk arrived, knowing an army was coming, positioned himself at the altar, and was killed rather than disclose a location the community had already ensured would outlast him. Number 5. Iona Abbey. You are standing on an island less than half a mile wide, 9 miles off the southwest coast of Scotland, and you already know what is coming. The Norse have been here before in 795 AD, in 802 AD, in 806 AD. You know what happened in 806. The monks who did not evacuate in time were driven to the beach below the monastery, and 68 of them were killed there on the sand. The community gave the place a name, Port na Martair, Martyrs Bay in Gaelic. The name is still on the maps. You are a monk named Blathmac, and you have come from Ireland to Iona specifically to be present when the Norse return. You know where the shrine containing Columba's bones is hidden. You know what the Norse will ask when they arrive. You have already decided what you will say. Columba founded the monastery on Iona in 563 AD, on a land grant from the king of Dal Riata, the Gaelic kingdom that straddled the western coast of Scotland and northeastern Ireland. For 200 years, Iona was not simply a monastery. It was the administrative center of the Columban Church, the institution that carried Christianity across Scotland, into Pictland, and through large portions of Ireland. No other Christian site in the British Isles held equivalent authority during those 2 centuries. Columba died on Iona in 597 AD and was buried in the abbey. His relics became the most venerated objects in the Columban tradition, and where the relics went, institutional authority followed. The Annals of Ulster records the 806 raid in terms that eliminate ambiguity. The entry reads, "The devastation of all Iona." The number killed is given precisely, 68 monks. The community that survived had already been relocating to the monastery at Kells in Ireland, and with them they carried the manuscript now known as the Book of Kells, which was being produced on Iona around 800 AD. Art historian Bernard Meehan of the Royal Irish Academy has described it as the most elaborately decorated, illuminated manuscript to survive from the early medieval period. The Book of Kells was never brought back to Iona. It is at Trinity College, Dublin. This sequence matters. The manuscript left the island in 806 and was never returned. The shrine containing Columba's bones was concealed before the Norse returned in 825. A monk named Blathmac traveled from Ireland to Iona, knowing the Norse would come again. These were not coincidences. The primary record for what happened in 825 is Walafrid Strabo's Carmen de Martirio Sancti Blathmaci, a Latin poem composed by a Frankish monk within a generation of the event, sometime between 825 and 849 AD. Walafrid Strabo records that Blathmac came to Iona, longing for martyrdom. When the Norse arrived, they demanded the location of the shrine containing Columba's relics. The community had already concealed it, portions of the relics had been removed, elements of the shrine buried or distributed, and knowledge of what remained was restricted to those who had already ensured the concealment held. Blathmac stood at the altar. He disclosed nothing. Walafrid Strabo records that the Norse killed him there, describing him as torn limb from limb. He died protecting a location he knew the community had already vacated. 24 years after Blathmac's death, the Annals of Ulster records a formal administrative decision. In 849 AD, Columba's relics were officially divided. A portion was carried to Dunkeld in Scotland under the direction of Kenneth MacAlpin, who was consolidating authority over the Picts. A second portion went to the monastery at Kells in Ireland. The relics survived the 825 raid because the community had planned their concealment before the Norse arrived. The plan Blathmac died to protect had already been executed before he took his position at the altar. The mainstream explanation for Blathmac's presence on Iona in 825 AD is the one Walafrid Strabo himself supplies: a monk seeking martyrdom, an expression of a documented strain of early medieval Irish monastic spirituality that valued witness unto death. Under this reading, the relic concealment was a practical response to Norse pressure. Blathmac's refusal to speak was individual devotion, and the 849 division was an administrative decision made in the aftermath. The account is internally consistent and supported by the primary source, but the sequence of decisions made before 825, the permanent removal of the Book of Kells in 806, the pre-raid concealment of the shrine, the deliberate positioning of a monk who knew the relics had already been distributed, does not read as improvisation under pressure. Institutions do not send men to die for secrets. The men themselves know have already been moved, unless the dying is itself part of the plan. What does it mean that Blathmac traveled to a previously raided island, knowing the Norse would return, and knowing, with certainty, that the relics were no longer where the Norse would demand he say they were? Who else in the community held full knowledge of what had been concealed and where it had been sent? And the Book of Kells left Iona in 806 AD and was never brought back. Was that decision made by the same people who positioned Blathmac at the altar 19 years later as part of the same institutional calculation about what could be sacrificed and what had to survive? Blathmac chose where and when to die to protect a location his community had already sealed. In northern Ethiopia, monks designed an entire monastery around the principle that access itself is the seal, a system so complete that it has had no exception in 15 centuries, and the manuscripts inside have never been catalogued by any institution from outside. Number 6. Debre Damo. You are standing at the base of a sandstone mesa in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. The plateau spreads flat in every direction, and then Debre Damo rises from it, a rock pillar with sheer walls dropping straight to the earth on all sides. There is no path to its top, there is no staircase, there is no door at ground level. The cliff face offers nothing. To enter Debre Damo, you grasp a braided leather strap suspended from the summit rim and climb approximately 50 feet of vertical sandstone. A monk above holds a second strap beneath your arms to assist the ascent. This is the entrance. There is no other, and there has never been another in the 15 centuries since this monastery was founded. The founding tradition recorded in the Ethiopian Synaxarium holds that Abba Aragawi, the founding monk, did not climb a rope. He was carried to the top by a divine serpent. The monks who came after him did not build stairs, because Aragawi did not build stairs. Zamikael Aragawi was one of the 9 saints, the Tisatu Kidusan missionaries, from the Eastern Roman Empire and Arabia, credited with translating the scriptures into Ge'ez and establishing the foundational monastic communities of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. The founding is recorded in the Ethiopian Synaxarium, the church's authoritative collection of saints' lives. Aragawi's feast day falls on the 14th of Hamle in the Ethiopian liturgical calendar, and the founding at Debre Damo is its central narrative. The leather strap by which every visitor today ascends the cliff is the institutionalization of that founding image. A serpent lifting a man to an otherwise unreachable height. The rope did not replace the serpent. The rope is the serpent made continuous. The monastery complex on the plateau includes the 6th century church of Abba Aragawi, considered among the oldest standing churches in Ethiopia, along with a secondary church, monk cells, and a library holding illuminated manuscripts in Ge'ez. British architectural historian David Buxton documented the church's pre-Aksumite structural features in a 1951 paper published in Archaeologia and expanded the documentation in the Abyssinians in 1970. Buxton described the leather strap system as in continuous use from at least the medieval period. It was not added as a security response to a specific threat. It is how the monastery was designed to be entered from the beginning. Buxton did not catalog the library. He documented the stone. Since the founding, no woman has been permitted to ascend the mesa. The prohibition extends to female animals. The livestock on the plateau are exclusively male. No documented exception to either prohibition exists across 15 centuries of continuous monastic life. It is among the most sustained exclusions in continuous practice at any active religious site for which records survive. The exclusion was not a restriction imposed after women first arrived. Women were forbidden before the rope was braided. The Ge'ez manuscript holdings at Debre Damo remain uncatalogued by any outside institution. Ge'ez is a liturgical language used exclusively within the Ethiopian Orthodox and Eritrean Orthodox traditions. It has no living spoken community and requires specialized training to read. What is known of the collection comes from Ethiopian Orthodox scholars and from documentation the monastery has produced for its own purposes. Buxton's 1951 survey addressed structure, not contents. No subsequent Western academic survey has been more complete. The manuscripts have been physically sealed from most potential readers by the 50-foot rope climb and remain forbidden to all female scholars by the founding prohibition before a single page is opened. The mainstream explanation for Debre Damo's inaccessibility treats the natural sheer walls of the mesa as a defensive feature that the founding community adapted into a spiritual geography emphasizing withdrawal from the world, a theological value common to Ethiopian Orthodox monasticism, broadly. Under this reading, the rope system and the access restrictions are expressions of the monastic commitment to separation from secular life. The geography suited the principle, but the founding tradition does not describe the mesa as a defensive selection. It describes it as a destination. Aragawi was not hiding. He was following a serpent to the top of a cliff that he then designed to have no ground-level entrance because he did not arrive through one. If the founding design of Debre Damo is a 50-foot rope climb with no alternative, what was Aragawi sealing the plateau against that required the complete elimination of ground-level access? The manuscripts have remained on that plateau for 15 centuries, in a language almost no outsider reads. In a library no outsider has fully catalogued. What does a complete inventory of that collection contain? that the monastery's own documentation has not described. And the prohibition on female animals, the exclusively male livestock on a sandstone mesa in Tigray, who issued that rule in the 6th century? Under what authority? And why does it continue to govern which animals are permitted to stand on that plateau today? At Debre Damo, inaccessibility was the founding design. The monks built the seal into the structure itself because there was never meant to be a door. In Armenia, monks went further. They carved their monastery out of the living rock of a mountain gorge, cut sealed chambers directly into the cliff face, and those chambers were built to hold the most contested relic in the Christian world, one of which is no longer there. Number 7. Gegard Monastery. You are standing in the Azat River Gorge, 35 miles east of Yerevan, Armenia. What is in front of you is not a monastery placed against a cliff, it is a monastery built into the cliff. The outer stone buildings are 12th and 13th century, and behind them, carved directly into the gorge wall by monks with hammers and chisels, are chambers cut from solid rock. The name Gegard is Armenian for Lance Gegardavank, the monastery of the lance, named for the weapon described in the Gospel of John as having pierced the side of Christ at the crucifixion. Armenian church tradition holds that the apostle Thaddeus brought that lance to Armenia in the 1st century AD, and that it was housed here in these rock-cut chambers. The lance is no longer here. Where it went, the surviving record does not definitively say. What remains are the sealed chambers monks built to contain it. Armenian ecclesiastical records associate the site's founding with Gregory the Illuminator in the early 4th century AD. Following Armenia's formal adoption of Christianity in 301 AD, the earliest state adoption of Christianity documented in recorded history. The structures visible today are not from that period. The main church was constructed in 1215 AD, under the patronage of the Zakharian princes, who controlled northeastern Armenia following the decline of Seljuk power in the region. The Procyon family extended the complex in the 1280s, commissioning rock-cut chambers carved directly into the gorge wall. The Gavet of Papak and Ruzukan, dated by inscription to 1288 AD, is one of those chambers. A second Gavet and a spring chamber, where water emerges from the cliff face, complete the carved sequence. These spaces were executed during the same building campaign that produced cut stone construction elsewhere in the complex, by a community that had every resource available to build in the open. The monks chose to go into the mountain anyway. The Armenian Church's claim about the Holy Lance rests on Thaddeus, identified in Armenian tradition as Jude the Apostle, one of the 12 whom the tradition holds, arrived in Armenia in 43 AD, carrying the lance among the relics he transported. For more than a millennium, according to Armenian ecclesiastical documentation, the lance was housed at Gegard. Its transfer out of the monastery is referenced in medieval Armenian sources, including records connected to the historian Movses Koronatsi. The receiving institution is not definitively identified in any of them. Vagarshapat Cathedral, now called Echmiadzin Cathedral, the seat of the Armenian Apostolic Church, appears in some Armenian sources as the destination. Western accounts connect the lance's movement to the Knights Hospitaller, operating in the Holy Land during the Crusader period. Neither institution has produced a provenance record that closes the question. The monastery is named for the lance. The lance is not there. Those two facts coexist in the record without explanation. Gegard's medieval documentation makes a second claim that does not resolve any more cleanly. Armenian ecclesiastical records from the medieval period state that Thaddeus brought to Armenia not only the lance, but a fragment of Noah's Ark, which was held at Gegard alongside the lance. The current location of that relic is also unresolved. Parts of the complex are forbidden to all but clergy. The monastery does not publicly display either object today. The UNESCO inscription, which designated Gegard a World Heritage Site in 2000, documents the architectural significance of the carved chambers, with care researchers who studied the acoustics prior to the inscription, confirmed that the resonance inside the rock-cut spaces amplifies liturgical chant in ways that are audible to visitors today, and that the geometry of the carved rooms was designed to produce that effect. The inscription does not address either relic or the question of where they went. The mainstream explanation for the absent transfer record is archival attrition. Medieval Armenia was not a stable archival environment. Seljuk incursions in the 11th century, Mongol invasions in the 13th, and Timurid campaigns in the 14th collectively destroyed institutions and eliminated the scholars who kept them running. Under this reading, the gap is a wound left by regional catastrophe, not institutional concealment. But the Protean building campaign of the 1280s occurred after the Mongol invasions, not before them. A monastic community intact enough to commission carved chambers inside living rock in 1288 AD was a community intact enough to record what happened to the object the monastery was named for. The silence in the record is not the same as the destruction of the record. It is specific to one object, in one monastery, whose name announces what it once held. What were those sealed rock chambers built to hold all of what they were built to hold, including whatever the surviving documentation declines to mention? If the lance reached Echmiadzin, why does no record from Echmiadzin confirm its arrival? If the Hospitallers carried it out of Armenia, which campaign, which commander, which entry in the military order's own documented history? And what is inside the forbidden sections, the carved spaces the UNESCO inscription leaves unnamed? Gegard was named for an object whose departure the record cannot account for. On the Tur Abdin Plateau, in what is now southeastern Turkey, a monastery founded in 397 AD has stood without interruption for 16 centuries through the fall of Rome, through Arab conquest, through every Mongol campaign, and the underground chambers beneath it, of Roman-era construction, have never been examined by any outside party in all that time. Number 8. Mor Gabriel Monastery. The year is 397 AD. You are on the Tur Abdin Plateau in what is now southeastern Turkey, and the Roman Empire is still intact. Two monks named Samuel and Simeon have chosen this specific location on the plateau to found a monastery. The plateau has been inhabited since the Bronze Age. Beneath the ground where they are building are structures from the Roman period, stone construction older than the Christian tradition they are establishing here. The monastery they found will be called the Monastery of the Wondrous Mountain, and eventually Mor Gabriel. It will be inhabited continuously from this year until the present. Every other monastery in this video, the Atlantic Pillar of Skellig Michael, the cliff face of Sumela, the gorge-carved chambers of Gegard, has experienced periods of abandonment, of emptiness, of sealed doors, with no one on either side of them. Mor Gabriel has not. What the monks of Mor Gabriel have kept sealed underground has been sealed for 1,627 years, without interruption. Samuel and Simeon are identified in Syriac Christian tradition as the founders of the complex. Mor Gabriel follows the Syriac Orthodox tradition, conducting its liturgy in Classical Syriac, a language distinct from the Greek of the Eastern Church and from the Latin of the Western Church, traceable to the Aramaic dialects of the region at the time of the monastery's founding. Samuel died in 433 AD. The complex he and Simeon established covers approximately 40 acres of the plateau. The church they built, dated to 397 AD, is among the oldest continuously used church buildings in the world. Sebastian Brock of Oxford University, a leading scholar of Syriac Christianity, has documented the monastery's historical continuity as among the most complete in the ancient Christian world. The Tur Abdin Plateau held documented Roman-era occupation before either monk arrived. The chambers beneath Mor Gabriel are consistent with Roman construction techniques and date to the period of the monastery's founding or earlier. The monks incorporated them into the monastery's structure from the beginning. The functions those chambers have served across 16 centuries are described in monastery documents. They have not been independently verified. Access has not been granted for comprehensive archaeological survey. The survival record of Mor Gabriel covers every political transition the Tur Abdin Plateau has experienced since the late Roman period. The monastery survived the Sassanid Persian campaigns of the 5th through 7th centuries, the Arab-Muslim conquests that transferred the region from Byzantine to Umayyad governance in the 7th, the Seljuk invasions of the 11th century, and the Mongol campaigns of the 13th. It survived the campaigns of Timur Tamerlane in 1394 and 1395, which devastated the Syriac Christian population of the Tur Abdin and destroyed the surrounding villages. The villages did not survive. The monastery did. It survived the full Ottoman period and the crisis years of 1914 through 1918, during which the broader Syriac community suffered losses documented under the designation Sayfo. None of the empires that have controlled the Tur Abdin Plateau since 397 AD still exist. More Gabriel does. Between 2008 and 2013, the Turkish state filed claims asserting that portions of More Gabriel's land constituted public forest or treasury property. The monastery traced its landholding documentation to the Byzantine period. The case drew international attention. The European Parliament passed Resolution 2010-2856 RSP in November 2010, calling for the protection of the monastery's rights. The Turkish Court of Cassation ruled in the monastery's favor in 2013. The underground chambers were among the property in dispute. More Gabriel also holds one of the oldest archives of classical Syriac writing in the world. Classical Syriac is used only within the Syriac Orthodox, Syriac Catholic, Assyrian, and Chaldean Christian traditions. The collection has been partially documented by monastery-affiliated scholars. No comprehensive independent catalog has been published. The mainstream explanation for the restricted underground chambers is the straightforward one. Monastic communities maintain canonical authority over their own religious spaces. Access is sealed for the same institutional reasons. It is sealed at every functioning monastery in this video, and the absence of independent archaeological survey reflects standard practice rather than deliberate concealment. What lies beneath More Gabriel, under this reading, is what lies beneath any monastery of comparable age, burial spaces, storage areas, accumulated material history. That reading accounts for most ancient monasteries. It does not account for what distinguishes More Gabriel from every other site in this video. The combination of 1,627 years of unbroken habitation, Roman-era construction beneath a Christian foundation, and a manuscript archive in a language almost no outsider reads fluently, none of it independently surveyed, none of it independently confirmed. What the monks have been guarding since 397 AD has been guarded without interruption longer than most surviving human institutions have existed. What is the institutional knowledge 16 centuries of monks have preserved about those chambers? And in what form does that knowledge pass from one generation to the next? More Gabriel survived Timur's 1394 campaign and a 5-year legal challenge in the 21st century. What does a community protect when 1,627 years of unbroken habitation are themselves the record? And the Syriac manuscripts, in a collection no outsider has independently catalogued what was chosen to be copied and preserved across 16 centuries. In the Kidron Valley, southeast of Bethlehem, a monastery has maintained a different kind of sealed space since 483 AD, one where the ceiling was made deliberately visible, where you can stand outside the wall and look through iron bars at what is inside, and what is inside are skulls. Number 9. Mar Saba Monastery. You are on a path descending into the Kidron Valley, and the monastery has been visible for the last mile built directly into the cliff face of the canyon, so that its towers and domes emerge from the limestone as though the rock produced them rather than monks placing them there. It is one of the most recognizable monastic structures in the world. But you came here for something specific. On the far side of the main complex, past the Church of St. Nicholas, there is a tower. The female tower, the Pyrgos ton Gynikon, in Greek, built for you, because you cannot go further. A barred window looks into the interior of the charnel house. Behind the bars, arranged in rows, are the skulls of the monks who were killed here when the Persians came in 614 AD. They are not hidden, they are displayed. Someone arranged them deliberately so they could be seen through the bars, from exactly where you are standing, outside the monastery, unable to enter. The arrangement has been maintained since the 7th century. The door behind the bars has not been opened to an outside researcher in all that time. Sabas of Cappadocia founded the monastery in 483 AD in the desert canyon, running from the hills east of Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. He was born in 439 AD in Cappadocia, entered monastic life as a child, came to the Judean desert, and built his Laura, a cluster of cells around a central church in the cliff face of the Kidron Valley. At its height, the Mar Saba community housed hundreds of monks drawn from across the Byzantine world. The founding rule banned women from crossing the monastery's threshold from the day it was established. The female tower, built to provide female visitors with a formal point of access without entering, is not a later restriction or a modification. It is part of the original monastic design. In 614 AD, Sassanid Persian forces under Khusra II swept through the Judean desert following their capture of Jerusalem and the True Cross. The monks of Mar Saba did not leave. Church records place the death toll at 44 monks killed on the monastery grounds. The Greek Orthodox Church has commemorated the holy 44 martyrs of Mar Saba on the 20th of March every year since 614 AD, one of the longest uninterrupted liturgical commemorations in the history of the Eastern Church. The bones of those monks were gathered after the Persian withdrawal and placed in the charnel house. The skulls were arranged where they remain. The arrangement matters. A charnel house designed to keep remains sealed and inaccessible is one thing. The Mar Saba charnel house was designed so the skulls are visible from outside the monastery through an iron-barred window set at eye level. This is not burial. It is display, constructed to be seen by the very people the founding rule prohibits from entering. The skull arrangement is not incidental to the monastery's architecture. It is part of it. Someone in the 7th century, or sometime after, made a decision about how the remains of the 44 martyrs should be positioned, and that positioning was intended to be permanent, visible, and bounded by iron bars. John of Damascus arrived at Mar Saba in the early 8th century after leaving his administrative post in the Umayyad government. He spent the remainder of his life at the monastery, writing the exposition of the Orthodox faith and the fount of knowledge texts that synthesized the theology of the Greek Church Fathers and became foundational documents of Eastern Christian thought. He drew on the monastery's library for his scholarship. That library has never been independently catalogued. What John had access to in the Mar Saba collection, what documents existed in that cliff face library in the early 8th century, is known only through what John cited. No external survey has verified what else the collection contained then or contains now. The mainstream explanation for Mar Saba's restricted practices is institutional continuity. The charnel house remains sealed to outsiders because Eastern Orthodox tradition treats monastic remains as sacred and access to them as a matter of canonical authority. The women's ban is a founding rule maintained under that same authority, and the library's uncatalogued status is standard for a functioning monastic institution that has not invited external documentation. Under this reading, the visible skulls are a form of permanent commemoration rather than deliberate display, and the female tower is an accommodation rather than a structural seal. What it is not, under this reading, is evidence of deliberate design. But the female tower was built into the founding plan. The skulls are arranged to be visible from where women stand. You do not build a tower for people you are excluding unless the exclusion is permanent and the people you are excluding are expected to keep coming. That is not an accommodation. That is an architecture of permanent restriction designed before the first excluded person arrived. John of Damascus wrote, "The theology of the Eastern Church in a monastery where women have never crossed the threshold." What does the body of scholarship produced inside a monastery designed as a sealed space tell us about what was kept inside, and what does the library that supported it still contain? What act, 1,543 years ago, made Sabas design the entrance to Mar Saba as permanently restricted by sex from the founding day? Who arranged the skulls of the 44 martyrs to be visible from outside the wall, and what did that arrangement mean to the monks who chose it? And the library from which John of Damascus drew his theology, what else was in it that no external catalogue has yet recorded? The visible bones at Mar Saba are the only thing at this monastery that is not sealed. In Egypt, the tradition that produced every monastery in this video sealed itself at the source. Number 10. Monastery of St. Anthony. You are in the eastern desert of Egypt, and you are looking up at a cliff. The South Galala Plateau rises out of the desert floor, and somewhere above you 2,400 feet up, reachable by climbing more than 1,200 stone steps, is a cave in the rock face. The man who has been living in that cave for years is named Anthony, and he is dying. He has spent his life going higher and further from every human settlement, first to a tomb near his home village in Middle Egypt, then to an abandoned Roman fort in the deep desert, and finally here, to this plateau, above the Red Sea coast, where he has been for the last 40 or so years, of a life that has now reached approximately 105 years. His disciples have climbed the 1,200 steps to be with him. He is giving them instructions. He wants to be buried up here in the cliff. He does not want his body carried down the mountain. He does not want it displayed, venerated, or preserved in any Egyptian tradition he has witnessed across a century of life in the desert. He tells them to seal the cave when they are done. He tells them to tell no one where it is. They are standing at the origin of Christian monasticism, and its founder is ordering them to hide it. Athanasius of Alexandria wrote the life of Anthony within a generation of Anthony's death in 356 AD. His biography is among the most widely read documents in early Christian history and served as the 5 AD founding text of the monastic tradition that subsequently spread across the entire Christian world. In the life of Anthony, Athanasius is explicit about the burial instructions. Anthony requested a secret burial to prevent his body from being kept in Egypt and venerated in the manner of Egyptian sacred remains. He gave his staff to Bishop Athanasius himself and his sheepskin cloak to the Bishop of Antinopolis. He asked the 2 disciples with him named Makarios and Amathus to seal the burial site. They honored the request. The location was not recorded. The monastery of St. Anthony Deir Anba Antony, in Arabic, was founded by disciples at the base of the plateau after Anthony's death, where it has operated continuously since 356 AD. It is recognized by scholars of early Christianity and by the Coptic Orthodox Church as the oldest continuously operating Christian monastery in the world. The cave, 1,200 steps above the monastery, remains accessible only to members of the monastic community. Photography inside it is forbidden. It has never undergone an independent archaeological examination. Inside the cave church are murals painted in the 7th century AD. Those murals were whitewashed at some point in the monastery's medieval history. They remained concealed beneath the plaster for approximately 700 years. In the 1980s and 1990s, the American Research Center in Egypt conducted a conservation project that removed the whitewash and revealed the paintings in remarkable condition. Why the 7th century murals were covered is not documented. What the whitewash was intended to accomplish, concealment, preservation, or replacement, is not explained in any record associated with the monastery. The relics of Anthony himself followed a trajectory the documentation tracks incompletely. In the 4th century, remains claimed to be Anthony's were transported to Alexandria. From Alexandria, they were transferred to Constantinople. In the 11th century, French sources record their transport to the region of Dauphine in what is now France, to the Abbey of Saint-Antoine in Viennois, which became a significant pilgrimage site. Whether any of these transfers moved the actual remains of Anthony, or whether his instructions in 356 AD were successfully followed and the genuine burial sealed in the plateau has never been opened, has not been established. The monastery itself has not publicly resolved the question. The mainstream explanation for these layered concealments is the straightforward one. Anthony was a historical figure of enormous significance, whose burial instructions were motivated by documented theological concerns about relic veneration. The cave's restricted access reflects standard monastic canonical authority over sacred space. The whitewashed murals were covered as part of common medieval maintenance or renovation practice, and the relic transfer sequence is standard for the medieval period. When saints' remains moved between institutions under political and ecclesiastical arrangements that were not always well documented, each individual element of this explanation is coherent. What is less coherent is the accumulation. A founder who ordered his burial sealed and location hidden. A cave that has been controlled by one institution for 17 centuries without independent examination. Murals concealed for 700 years with no surviving explanation of why. A relic sequence that cannot be conclusively verified against the original burial site. And all of it at the origin point of a tradition that produced every monastery in this video, every sealed room, every restricted library, every charnel house and rope ladder and forbidden threshold. Everything descended from a man who looked at his disciples and said, "Seal the cave, tell no one." Where is the original burial? And what would the cave contain if it were opened for the first time since 356 AD? Why were the 7th century murals whitewashed and held concealed for 7 centuries in a monastery whose entire existence is organized around preserving its founder's memory? And when Anthony ordered his disciples to seal the cave and keep the location secret, was that instruction obeyed? Or did the relic transfers that followed mean the cave held something other than what tradition records? Across 10 monasteries and 17 centuries, the pattern is the same. Monks made deliberate decisions to seal what they knew, hide what they protected, and design the silence themselves. The founders sealed their tombs. The communities sealed their manuscripts. The builders sealed the architecture itself. Every suppression and every concealment in this video was chosen not by invaders, not by time, not by accident, by the people who lived inside. The origin sealed itself. If you made it to the end, subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to hear from you. And if this raised more questions than answers, that's exactly where the next video begins.